And hello again, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who've just tuned in or joined us in the hall, my name is Joe Miller. I'm the Frankfurt correspondent for the Financial Times, covering all things European car makers. I'm delighted to introduce our next session, which is on the smart connected battery and the future of electrification, no less, for which we have a stellar panel lined up. In no particular order, we have Jens Hinrichsen here from the semiconductor company NXP, Imogen Pierce, a director at strategic comms firm Influence eMobility, and Hui Zhang, Vice President for Europe at NIO. Please welcome them all to the stage. Marvelous. Now, before we get going, Jens, I think you have some short opening remarks to share with us, so please.
Thank you.
Take to the lectern.
Yes, thanks everybody for joining, and thanks Joe for giving me the opportunity to kick this panel off. I think we all recognize that the demand of electrified vehicles is constantly increasing, and compared to what the industry anticipated years back, is actually even accelerating, right? And so we at NXP expect that by 2030, approximately 60% of all the cars, the new cars, being produced, sorry, this doesn't work, are electrified, yeah? and the market also has truly reached an inflection point from our perspective. So it's moving from a low volume niche market towards a true high volume automotive mass market. And the car makers constantly improve the cars, the performance of the cars, and make it even more convenient using them. I think they take the cost out of the cars and make them more affordable. And they are really getting ready for true high-volume automotive mass market production at the highest level of quality. And this is really indeed driving transformation. And we think really that electrification is driving transformation within the traditional automotive industry. And you see that, let's say, car makers are electrifying their entire fleet across all the brands and all the models. You see that new market entrants are already available and moving further into the market with new technologies and new ideas. Innovation cycles are getting very important, and time to market is really critical. So you see some players being able to spin a new design from idea to production within 9 to 12 months. New technologies are moving in, and also a lot of services, mainly around the battery, are being available and introduced. And the car is increasingly more moving from a traditionally very hardware-defined element towards increasingly more software-defined. And with the battery being the heart of the electric vehicle, a lot of these transformations and a lot of these technology trends are around the battery. And the battery is indeed the most valuable and therefore also most differentiating element of an electric vehicle. And one of these transformation trends we are seeing around the battery is indeed the idea of the cloud-connected smart battery. So the idea of the cloud-connected smart battery is basically that you bring the battery to life from the day the cell is born and keep the battery on learning over lifetime. By doing basically, or by establishing basically a digital twin of the battery in the cloud, combine it with machine learning and artificial intelligence, and then leveraging basically big data, swarm data, not only of that one particular car where the battery is built in, no, but of a lot of cars, of an entire fleet, of an entire pool. And that really significantly improves the diagnostic features of the battery. And you can imagine the advantages of this cloud-based connected smart battery is definitely obvious. So you can really significantly improve the performance of the car, and therefore basically the range. And while you leverage the maximum power out of the battery, you do this in a very gentle way without damaging the battery. You increase also longevity of the battery. You can really define also and also protect the residual value of the battery at any point of time in the life cycle. And you can also imagine that a lot of use cases can be built on this particular smart battery. Well, the idea of the cloud-connected smart battery is not new. Yeah? We all know this, but the way on what data are collected, how the data collection is being done, and what you eventually do with the data offers a lot of room for innovations. And it requires, from our perspective, a lot of collaboration amongst all the players in the value chain of making an electric vehicle, like the car maker, like the battery maker, like the tier ones, like the chip makers, like us. It requires really collaboration to leverage the full potential of this particular innovation. And I think if we really do this, we have a lot in our hands to create a lot of benefits for society as well as for environment.
Marvelous. Thank you very much, Jens. Please take a seat again. Before we launch into our discussion, I just thought I should remind everyone that you can put questions if you're watching online in the chat box, which I believe is on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll come to some questions in the room a little bit later, and hopefully have enough time to deal with all of them. Jens, it was very interesting watching you there. I was thinking about the first time I really, as a correspondent, looking at primarily the auto industry, got interested in semiconductors, and you can probably pinpoint exactly when that was, some point in 2020, at the end of 2020. There was a steep learning curve for me, but one of the things that I found quite interesting was that there was quite a steep learning curve for the OEMs too. In fact, as an anecdote, I always like to recount, and I won't name either the OEM or the semiconductor company, but someone at a large semiconductor company told me that soon after the crisis started, someone from a very large European automaker called and said, "Can you run your fabs overnight and on weekends?" Not realizing that, of course, that's what you already do in the industry in order to maximize utilization. But my question is, when you're looking at chips and how important they are and the designs are to the future of batteries, do you get the sense that the industry appreciates the importance of that and are alive to the opportunities and are close enough to the semiconductor industry to work, well enough together?
I think that is a very good question, Joe, and I really truly believe the industry is changing, right? So, and it is not only the car makers, it's also, like I said, all the players in the value chain who has to think a little bit differently. And also for us as semiconductor vendors, we have to really change our way of working. And as mentioned also in my short introduction, collaboration is for me key, right? So if I have to develop a semiconductor and I have to define the specification by myself and then throw it to the wall and hope it sticks, right? I think it is a waste of time. I really need to work with the partners together to really truly understand and what is really required, and not only now, but also in future, considering also the fact that it takes several years to get the semiconductor hardware really rolled out, right? And we need to sync up on the needs and on the innovation cycles. That's really one thing. Plus, we also need to learn to understand the entire system holistically, and rather, from our perspective as a semiconductor vendor, just being a component supplier and have then a catalog device and then hopefully somebody can use it. I really believe that we increasingly more need to offer complete, even pre-validated hardware solutions which are very well aligned with the OEMs way in advance. And we can only learn from each other, like the OEMs also can only learn from me if I offer ideas of innovation. So sometimes it's not even known what is possible and can be done. And this requires really close collaboration. Otherwise, we will never get out of this imbalance.
It's interesting you mentioned syncing up there. I thought maybe I'll come to you on this. One of the hallmarks, I suppose, of the battery electric world at the moment is its differentiation. There isn't really a universal approach to how the battery electric vehicle should be designed and how customers should experience that. And NIO is, and this perhaps not that familiar to European audiences yet, has its own differentiated approach. Perhaps you can elaborate on what that is before we go forward.
Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for the question, Joe. I think NIO is different in the following way, especially if we talk about the battery technology and the smart. NIO is only passenger car maker right now swap the battery pack. And luckily, I can say we started with our first battery swap station in November 2018. And until today, we have a build-up in China and also one battery swap station in Europe, in Norway, total 918 battery swap stations, and with which we have done over 8 million battery swap already for the user, both in China and also in Norway. So that is one of the USP of a NIO. Of course, a NIO, I want to just add on, is not only another car company. So the purpose of the NIO is really want to be a user enterprise. We really put the user on the highest position and with the highest priority. That's also connected to the technology we developed of a battery swap, but also is connected to the innovative business model we developed and launched since 2020 in August, called BaaS, Battery as a Service. Probably we will come to that point later on.
We most certainly will. And of course, if you're owning the batteries, which you do, then optimizing their life is part of your business model as well. Imogen, you wear many hats today, but have quite a lot of expertise working for various different players in the automotive industry. Jens mentioned in his opening remarks an inflection point. Now that you've stepped out of a particular company, do you believe that we are at an inflection point when it comes to the battery electric vehicle?
Yeah, I think I should really caveat that with, I'm definitely not an expert, but I am professionally nosy about what's going on in this space and sort of trying to piece together that puzzle. And I think what's been really, really fascinating is that we know we're going to go to electric. That's dictated to us by policy, and we're also seeing tremendous kind of, innovations in the space. But what's happening now is this opportunity to combine various different innovations that haven't happened in a vacuum, introducing AI and machine learning to understand more and more about batteries, and actually thinking, okay, we don't just need to improve battery chemistry, but how do we improve that battery chemistry? And how do we optimize the different charging solutions that exist for different types of users and different types of mobility? And suddenly this sort of explodes into this like very unwieldy world, which the more data we have, the more that we can sort of assess the right solutions. In terms of, I think, more broadly, I mean, the other day I went to see a 1.2 megawatt battery for a massive mining excavator, and I think if that exists, that should give us enormous confidence that we are absolutely at that inflection point.
Mention confidence. Jens, we mentioned very briefly battery as a service. That encompasses all sorts of things, and part of the problem, I suppose, is trying to work out what the future will be, because right now it doesn't really exist outside of battery swapping. We see all of these concepts of the connected home. We see concepts of using electric cars and their batteries to power the grid and to power homes. But this very, shall I say, fragmented the vision right now. But you're in the position here of looking at the next 5 years, the next 10 years, and trying to work out what you're going to build into batteries and what you need in order to service this new model. Do you have any clarity on what that means and what the world will look like?
Yeah, well, that is a good question, and we as a semiconductor player, we look at it a little bit from a different perspective, right? Like I said, it's really not clear what data need to be collected, how the data are collected, and what you finally do with the data. And I think the creativity of the OEMs, also of certain service providers, based on data collections we do and based on hardware platforms we create, is really absolutely endless, I would say. It's there is no limit from my perspective. Therefore, it's very difficult to vision out on how this really basically looks in future. And for us as a semiconductor vendor, it is the most important thing is to focus on the how. That means, how do we provide really the right data, and how do we make the data also accurate and smart and intelligent and really precise, so that all these use cases and models can be built on. So if NIO really wants to extend the range, I think we need to continuously work on making basically the battery diagnostics even smarter, right? And so the more precise data I can provide, the more you can leverage and unleash the full power out of the battery without damaging it. Also, the service models which are established by NIO, you can at any point of time in the battery as a service concept, you can define the residual value of the particular battery if you have the right data available and the right diagnostics available. So you know really very well what is the value of this particular battery and where is it in the life cycle And so this gives plenty of opportunities I cannot even imagine, and it requires, again, here, the collaboration of the people together to define all these use cases based on what we can do. But I think, again, we need to continuously speak, work together, and then we envision suddenly new ideas you are not even thinking about right now.
Data seems to be, Jens, the word of the day. The questions that are coming in here online are mostly surrounding data. Yeah. On that matter, you are collecting an awful lot of data in order to move towards this battery as a service model. And at the same time, you're moving from your home market to Europe, expanding into Europe, where there are very different attitudes, at least in some countries in Germany where I'm based, to data collection. How do you navigate that challenge?
In fact, there's, as we just mentioned, a lot of data. I mean, first of all, when we come to European market, as probably you have read, we started in September last year with entering into the Norwegian market. And so far, luckily, we could even confirm to the business model because over 90% of the users in Norway, they selected a bus as a business model. It's pretty much similar or even slightly higher than the penetration rate of the bus model in China. And in terms of the data, I think we will still, first of all, be very compliant to the GDPR and also the data privacy. For that purpose, we are going to set up a more and more engineering team in that case. And secondly, we definitely collaborate with the local partner, I mean regional partner like NXP and also the other cloud provider here in Europe. And certainly the bus and also the battery swap is highly based on the algorithm and also the clouds. So in fact, we have running our own so-called NIO power clouds and also developed our own algorithm. After every battery swap, we will check 3D scanning about the battery pack status. And if it's unhealthy, we basically will take out of the circulation and then replace with a new one. It's for the safety of, for the user. And I think for the European overall market entrant, as probably you have seen, what we are employing is pretty much the similar user enterprise business model as we are practicing in Chinese market. We have our NIO house, we have our NIO service center, we are offering the battery swap station, we are offering the bus business model, and most important is the power for also related to the data, the NIO app. So the NIO app is currently we have sold until end of last month only less than 200,000 cars, but the NIO app has over 2.4 million downloads, and we have 240,000 daily active users. So everything from the point of the interest until actually the after-sale service or end of the life, we are interacting with our users through the app, which will generate, of course, also tons of the data.
Imogen, when you look at the, with interest at the consumer environment, we talked there about the data that he gathers. Some of us who are in the industry are familiar with battery as a service, we're familiar with things like V2G and all of these visions that exist. Do you get the sense, though, that consumers understand where this is going and are prepared to be a part of this world, to essentially share all of this data and to connect as what were distinct devices, their cars, their homes, etc., in such a in such a manner as to basically give it all to one company, more or less?
No, is the short answer. If you speak to non-electric vehicle drivers, the first question is, yeah, but what about charging? Or yeah, but what about range? And as soon as you have an electric vehicle, you realize that you just adapt in much the same way you adapted from going from a Nokia 3210 to a smartphone. But until you experience those things, having that sort of very granular insight into how they function, you just don't have. So it is very much up to the service providers and I think the OEMs of making that user experience really, really clear. And the challenge that exists, I think, in the industry is that, for example, the battery swapping model makes complete sense in areas where you don't have access to off-street parking. But in areas where, you know, lots of people have lots of driveways and actually you can do lots of sort of slow trickle charging, perhaps that makes sense. And what we have with all this data in machine learning is the opportunity to understand how that can be optimized for really, really specific people. For example, you know, with having this like swarm data within this battery in the cloud, you could literally go in, I mean, I'm assuming you can, you can correct me if I'm wrong, and you could understand woman, 30s, countryside living, and understand what does that battery service look like and make that as easy a user experience as possible. And I think that's exciting because when we think about connected services, it's really easy to think about Spotify or connected cars or autonomous vehicles. And actually there's a load of invisible things that we can start to unlock and make that transition to electric vehicles super seamless.
It's the think bigger strategy. There's lots of questions that have come in online, but I just want to check at this time whether there are any questions in the room. If there are, please raise your hand. Oh, there's one over there. Could we get a mic to my far right over here at the front? I think one is just coming towards you. And it's hard to see in the lights, but if there's anyone else who wants to follow up on that, put your hand up. No, I think just that gentleman over there.
Thank you. Question for Hui. It's great to hear about the battery health checks you carry out at the swapping stations. But out of interest in the technology, out of the 8 million swaps you've done, how many were deemed as unhealthy?
Again,
I think it was of the swaps you've done, how many were deemed as unhealthy? Was that correct? Yes.
How many what?
How many were deemed as unhealthy?
Oh, I mean, so basically the battery swap takes a total 5 minutes. And with the new generation technology, what we are operating, you don't need to get off the car. So you simply sit in the car and you can play live streaming and whatever. It takes 3.5 minutes, the mechanical battery swap processor. And in terms of the percentage of healthy of the battery, I think I can not really give you exactly number. The reason is because there's since we introduction of the battery swap, we have a different package of the battery, and also we have running 2 different generation of the battery swap station. But overall, I think what we will do in front of the user is really to make sure every battery swap is secured, and also we will do the 3D scanning after the battery swap to make sure that the battery you get after the swap is 100% healthy. And those are unhealthy, of course, we automatically take out of the circulation.
Thank you. We've got a question that's come in here. Perhaps Jens, start with you on this. It says, do you see power consumption efficiency advancements such as Mercedes demonstrated with the EQXX, which is this concept car that did 1,000 kilometers the other week, plus actually more than 1,000 kilometers on a single charge, as an answer to the charging crisis? In other words, in contrast to battery swapping, do you see this as the future, just enormous amounts of range from a single battery?
Well, I think these are different, completely different models, right? So while at the end with the NIO model, I do see basically that the consumer has got the opportunity to buy just purely the car and leave everything related to the battery to a kind of a service, right? And that is also a kind of a very hassle-free approach. Another hassle-free approach is that the car is performing perfectly well in the way on maybe even the best performing traditional car is doing, and you have exactly the same user experience like you see in this example you gave here right now, within range of 1,000 kilometers or miles maybe even in future. So I think it depends on what the consumer really wants, and I really like the variety of different models and giving everybody the opportunity to go their way. So there is not anymore that traditional car. You have different ways on supporting the consumer requirements. And indeed, of course, power consumption, advanced diagnostics, etc., which leverage anyhow the performance of a battery, is of advantage for both models, right? So you do not need to swap as often if your range is better, right? Also the longevity of the batteries is better. You have less batteries maybe in your life cycle running around. And here, in the other example, you just simply have a car which in itself, with the integrated battery, is performing completely on a level you are used to. And that's why I believe in both cases, in advanced diagnostics, leveraging the maximum potential out of the battery will benefit the consumer either way.
May I jump in?
Yeah, please.
Just to this question, I think, as you probably know, NIO is also going to launch ultra long range battery pack with 150 kilowatt with a range over 1,000 kilometer. But I think with a bus or battery swap, it still gives additional advantage to the user and also to the society. So first of all, as Jens mentioned, with a bus, if you don't purchase a battery pack, with a purchase a car, it give you a price reduction, owning a premium product. Secondly, it give a clearly advantage, increase the residual value of the cars, because you don't own the battery pack. And thirdly, very important combination of a battery swap with a bus as a business model is give you a freedom to upgrade your battery capacity. Because most of the case, you don't need to drive a range of 1,000 kilometers. I mean, most of the people here in Europe are driving average 35 to 65 kilometers. And for that, it's good enough you have a 70 or 80 kilowatt battery pack. And you don't necessarily need to buy a bigger battery pack because of the range necessity, only because you have to do 2 or 3 big trips in 1 year. And with the bus, we offer the flexibility to the user who can drive to the battery swap station and have a bigger battery pack for 1 or 2 months. And then you come back from your summer holiday or a long trip, and then you come back to a regular battery pack. And that makes an extremely contribution to the sustainability because we don't consume that big battery pack as we purchase. So of course, I think there's 2 different ways. Either technically wise, you try to develop extend the range with a battery pack, but still with a battery swap, with a bus, it offers a lot of different on top opportunities and also advantages.
Right. So it's not obsolete just because of the long-range battery. Imogen, hearing about battery swapping and contrasting with that the effort to create batteries that are longer lasting, etc. Do you think this variety that Jens alluded to complicates things for people who are not NIO? We're having enough trouble, for example, getting charging stations out there. If we have to have charging stations and battery swapping stations, we have a double logistical challenge. Is that a problem?
I mean, there's no doubt that if you really stop to think about it, it is quite a stressful, there's quite a long to-do list of things that we need to do. But I think purely thinking about batteries in terms of longer range or equipping petrol stations with charging facilities is a really fundamentally boring way to look at it. And actually what we need to think is well, we've got this opportunity to rethink how this works. And we have all the data at our disposal to identify new and currently unthought of business models. So I think, yes, it possibly is more complicated from a logistics standpoint, but all of the solutions that will come out of this will be much more fit for purpose, and it will be that range of solutions that will give us a much more sort of robust and resilient mobility system. And I think, NIO, it's super smart because you do get that control of how these batteries are charged as well, and can start to really think about how many people can cope with having a 50-mile range battery versus the likes of 1,000 kilometers, etc.
Jens, we're running out of time very, very quickly, but just briefly, thinking about, you talk to OEMs all of the time. When I speak to some of the major manufacturers now, they think the era of range anxiety is over, that we basically have batteries out there that more or less give you the same kind of range as a full petrol or diesel tank. And I sense they're less interested in pushing battery tech forward other than to get costs down now. Do you get the sense there's still an interest in sort of shooting for the stars?
You know, I really believe this optimization will not end, right? So will now the key driver be range, right? Or will be maybe the next one the longevity, or will it be safety environment, or will it be more sustainability over life cycle? I think the optimization will not end, and I think we will continue make the entire system more effective, efficient. Affordability is another really important area. I think it will continue. I agree with you that everybody now excited about range only. The time is over. I would say it's the whole set of safety, longevity, performance, everything related to this.
All right, well, I hope you'll come back to future of the car conferences and tell us what the latest trend is. Thank you, Jens, Hui, and Imogen. Thank you all for listening.